what happened to Chicago.
Students of music at DePaul University included trombonist James Pankow, trumpeter Lee Lochnan, and reed player Walter Perezider. They performed a variety of music in Chicago clubs from R&B to Irish. Most rock bands adopted the Beatles' instrumentation in the middle of the 1960s. Kind of a Drag, a nationwide song for the Buckinghams, peaked at number 1 in 1967. With baritone Lamb, baritone Kath, and bassist Peter Cetera, the Chicago Sextet was originally performed as a septet under the name The Big Thing. In 1968, Guercio was hired to oversee the Chicago Transit Authority and paid for its relocation to Los Angeles. Guercio was the manager for the Buckinghams as well, and he produced the number 1 hit I previously mentioned, Kind of a Drag. He persuaded Columbia Records to allow this band to launch a double album. Instead of a picture of the group, the cover would feature their emblem. Chicago Transit Authority, which was released in April 1969, had its chart debut in May when the band started going on nationwide tours. Without the aid of a big single, the album made it to the top 20 by July. It was adopted by freeform FM rock stations and became a success on the underground. By the end of the year, it had earned a gold certification and had sold over 2 million copies. The band performed at the Toronto Rock and Roll Festival in September 1969, and the promoter managed to secure permission to record the performance. Ever since, that same lo-fi cassette has appeared on an unending number of albums. Guercio was shocked to get a complaint about the band's usage of the name from the actual Chicago Transit Authority. In response, he shortened the moniker to Chicago. It was originally called Chicago when he and the band finished the second album, which was another double album, but is now more commonly referred to as Chicago 2. Even before Make Me Smile, the lead single from Chicago 2 reached the Hot 100, the album soared into the top 10 in just its second week on the Billboard list. The band first objected to the editing that was thought to be necessary to make the single suitable for AM radio play because it was an excerpt from a musical suite. However, it continued to chart just like its replacement 25 or 6 to 4 did. The album immediately attained gold status and then platinum. The group's third straight top 10 hit, Does Anybody Really Know What Time It Is, from their debut album, was issued by Columbia as their following single in the fall of 1970. Beginning in 1971, Chicago 3, another double album, was prepared for release and narrowly missed becoming the band's third gold and ultimately platinum record. However, Columbia went back and released Beginnings from the first album, backed with Color My World from the second, giving Chicago its fourth top 10 single. The band's singles did not, however, make it into the top 10. The 4-disc box set Chicago at Carnegie Hall, a live album, came in second and debuted in the top 5 while selling over 1 million copies. The band preferred Live in Japan, an album that was initially only available in Japan and was recorded in February 1972. Chicago 4, a 1 LP set, spent 9 weeks at the top of the charts. It eventually sold over 2 million copies thanks to its top 10 single Saturday in the Park, which went gold. The singles Feeling Stronger Every Day and Just You and Me were introduced to the top 10 by Chicago 5, which was released a year later and enjoyed a similar level of popularity. The next top 10 hit, I've Been Searching So Long, was released in advance of Chicago 6 in the late winter of 1974. The album was the band's third consecutive chart topper and another million seller. Call on Me became its second top 10 single. Chicago 7, which marked the promotion of Sideman percussionist Ladier de Oliveira as a full-fledged band member, appeared in the spring of 1975, spawned the top 10 hit Old Days, and became the band's fourth consecutive number 1 LP. After the profit-taking Chicago 9, Chicago's greatest hits in the fall of 1975 came Chicago 10, which missed hitting number 1 but eventually sold over 2 million copies, in part because of the inclusion of the Grammy-winning number 1 single, If You Leave Me Now. Chicago 11, released in the late summer of 1977, continued the seemingly endless string of success, reaching the top 10, selling 1 million copies and generating the top 5 hit Baby What a Big Surprise. But there was trouble beneath the surface. The band's big hits were starting to be solely ballads sung by Cetera, which frustrated the musicians' musical ambitions. They had failed to attract critical notice, and what press attention they were given often alluded to Guercio's Svengali-like control as manager and producer. Chicago determined to fire Guercio and demonstrate that they could succeed without him. Shortly afterward, they were struck by a crushing blow. Kath, a gun enthusiast, accidentally shot and killed himself on January 23, 1978. Though he, like most of the other members of the band, was not readily recognizable outside the group, he had had a large say in its direction, and his loss was invaluable. Nevertheless, the band closed ranks and went on. Guitarist Donnie Dacus was chosen from auditions and joined the band in time for its 12th LP release, which was given a non-numerical title, Hot Streets, and which put prominent pictures of the band members on the cover for the first time. The sound, as indicated by the first single, the top 20 hit Alive Again, was harder rock, and the band's core following responded. But Hot Streets was Chicago's first album since 1969 to miss the top 10. Chicago 13 then missed the top 20. At this point, Dacus left the band and Chicago hired guitarist Chris Pinnock as a sideman, eventually upping him to full-fledged group member status. Released in 1980, Chicago 14, the last album to feature De Oliveira, didn't go gold. By 1981, with the release of the 15th album, The Poor-Selling Greatest Hits Volume 2, the band parted ways with Columbia Records and began looking for a new approach. They found it in writer-producer David Foster, who returned to an emphasis on the band's talent for power ballads as sung by Cetera. They also brought in one of Foster's favorite session musicians, Bill Champlin, as a full-fledged band member. Champlin, formerly the leader of the Sons of Champlin, was a multi-instrumentalist with a gruff voice that allowed him to sing the parts previously taken by Kath. With these additions, the band signed with Full Moon Records, an imprint of Warner Brothers, and released Chicago 16 in the spring of 1982, prefaced by the single Hard to Say I'm Sorry, which topped the charts, leading to a major comeback. The album returned Chicago to million-selling top 10 status. Chicago 17, released in the spring of 1984, was even more successful. In fact, the biggest-selling album of the band's career, with platinum certifications for 6 million copies. It spawned 2 top 5 hits, Hard Habit to Break and You're the Inspiration. The renewed success, however, changed the long-established group dynamics, thrusting Cetera out as a star. He left the band for a solo career in 1985 and hasn't returned since. He had 2 number 1 hits. He had the duet with Amy Grant, The Next Time I Fall, and he had the song Glory of Love. Pinnock also left at about this time, and the band did not immediately bring in a new guitarist. As Cetera's replacement, Chicago found Jason Scheff, the 23-year-old bass-playing son of famed bassist Jerry Scheff, a longtime sideman with Elvis Presley. Scheff boasted a tenor voice that allowed him to recreate Cetera's singing on many of Chicago's hits. The split with Cetera had a negative commercial impact, however. Despite boasting a top 5 hit single in Will You Still Love Me, 1986's Chicago 18 only went gold. The band recovered, however, with Chicago 19, released in the spring of 1988. Among its singles, I Don't Want to Live Without Your Love made the top 5. Look Away topped the charts, and You're Not Alone made the top 10 as the album went platinum. Another single, What Kind of Man Would I Be, originally found on the album, was included as part of the 1989 compilation Greatest Hits 1982 to 1989, which counted as the 20th album and became a top 5 hit, with the album selling over 5 million copies. At the turn of the 80s into the 90s, Chicago underwent 2 more personnel changes, with guitarist Dwayne Bailey joining and original drummer Danny Serafin departing to be replaced by Tris Imboden. Chicago 21, released at the start of 1991, sold disappointingly, and Warner rejected the band's next offering. Chicago, however, maintained a loyal following that enabled them to tour successfully every summer. In 1995, Keith Howland replaced Bailey as Chicago's guitarist. The same year, the band regained rights to its Columbia catalog and established its own Chicago Records label to reissue the albums. They also signed to Giant Records, another Warner imprint, to release their 22nd album, Night and Day, a collection of big band standards that made the top 100. In 1998, they released Chicago 25, the Christmas album on Chicago Records, and they followed it in 1999 with Chicago 26, the live album. And the success of The Very Best of Chicago, Only the Beginning, demonstrated that their music continued to appeal to fans. Feeding off the renewed interest, the band reappeared in 2006 with the new album Chicago 30 on Rhino. 2 years later, the rejected Warner album from 1993 was finally released by Rhino. The album was called Stone of Sisyphus. Chicago toured regularly during the final years of the 2000s and returned to the recording studio with producer Phil Ramone for the 2011 album Oh Christmas 3, aka Chicago 33. During the early 2010s, they performed often and went on several joint tours with the Doobie Brothers. In May 2013, the band announced they'd begun recording their next album and released several songs sporadically throughout the rest of the year. They also made a splash at the 2014 Grammy Awards, performing several of their classics with Robin Thicke. The album, aptly titled Chicago 36 Now, was their first collection of original material in 8 years when it appeared in July 2014. Chicago was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2016. Peter Cetera declined to attend the ceremony. Now more than ever, The History of Chicago, a 2-hour documentary about the band's career, debuted on CNN in 2017. The group's fourth album of holiday-themed music, Chicago Christmas, arrived in 2019. Chicago received a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2020, an honor that was followed by a few lineup changes. Lamb, Loughnane, and Pankow led this new incarnation of Chicago throughout 2020, and it led them to the Born for This Moment 38th album released in July 2022. And as of 2023, it seems like they'll be together as long as the 3 original members are still there. And who knows, they may even continue, whether people like it or not. They'll probably continue. And that's what happened to Chicago. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Give me some facts about Chicago I mentioned. I know I didn't go over every little detail. It's hard to talk about a band Chicago's history in a little over 10 minutes. So let me know what I missed. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.